My name is Marcus Smith. I'm 38 years old, and I need you to understand something right now. The moment your family stops seeing you as disappointment and starts seeing you as salvation, that's when you discover who you really are. 3 days ago, my father stood in my apartment doorway at 11 p.m., something he swore he'd never do, begging me to save the empire he built while calling me a failure for 15 years. The same man who told investors I wasn't smart enough to run a lemonade stand was now asking me to write a check that would save everything. And here's what nobody tells you about that moment. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like standing at a crossroads where every direction changes who you become. This is the story of how one dinner destroyed my family's illusions, how 72 hours turned their golden child into a liability, and how the son they dismissed became the only thing standing between them and complete ruin. Because when the world you know collapses, the people left standing aren't always the ones you expect. Let me take you back to where this really started. The Hamilton Hotel, downtown, 6 months before everything detonated. My father, Richard Smith, had reserved the private dining room, the one with the crystal chandeliers and the view of the city skyline that made you feel like you owned something important. This wasn't family dinner. This was theater. My mother, Patricia, arrived wearing pearls that probably cost more than I made in 3 months managing the shipping yard. My younger brother, Jonathan, walked in like he was filming a cologne commercial, tailored navy suit, hair perfect, that expression he'd mastered that said he was already 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room before a word was spoken. I showed up in my work boots, not because I wanted to make a statement, but because I'd come straight from a 12-hour shift coordinating container logistics at the port. My hands still had grease under the nails. My shirt was clean but wrinkled. I was tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, the kind of tired that comes from proving yourself to people who've already decided you don't measure up. Dad saw me first. His expression shifted, just slightly, that micro-disappointment he'd perfected over the years. "Marcus," he said, his tone already setting the temperature. "You couldn't have changed?" "I came straight from work," I replied, sliding into my chair. "Work?" he repeated, like the word tasted wrong. "The shipping yard." Jonathan was already on his second glass of wine, leaning back with that relaxed confidence of someone who'd never been questioned. "Long day moving boxes, big brother?" The smile didn't reach his eyes. I didn't take the bait. I'd learned years ago that engaging just gave them ammunition. Long day managing a team of 47 people, coordinating international freight schedules, and preventing a $250,000 shipping error. But sure, moving boxes. Mom touched her napkin to her lips, a gesture that meant change the subject, keep it pleasant. But Dad wasn't interested in pleasant. He was interested in hierarchy. "Jonathan has news," Dad announced, swirling his scotch like he was conducting an orchestra. "Corporate news." Of course he did. Jonathan always had news when these dinners were called. Last time it was the VP promotion. Before that, the acquisition he'd supposedly spearheaded. "They're making me Chief Operating Officer," Jonathan said, and even I had to admit it sounded impressive. "Youngest COO in the company's history. I'll be overseeing all operational divisions, reporting directly to the board." Dad's face lit up like Jonathan had just cured disease. "That's my son. That's what vision looks like." He turned to me with an expression I'd seen my entire life, the one that said, "Here comes the comparison." "You hear that, Marcus? COO at 32. Do you understand what that means?" I understood exactly what it meant. It meant Jonathan was Dad's proof of concept, the validation that his approach to business and life worked. It meant I was the control group that failed. "It means he worked hard," I said evenly. "Congratulations, Jonathan." "Hard work," Dad scoffed. "You work hard, Marcus. You work very hard doing a job 1,000 other men could do tomorrow." Jonathan works smart. He positions himself. He networks. He understands leverage. The word leverage hung in the air like smoke. Dad loved that word. He'd built his commercial real estate empire on leverage, financial, social, strategic. Everything was a chess move. Everyone was a piece on the board. "Your brother," Dad continued, warming to his subject now, "is being considered for the governor's Business Advisory Council." The governor, Marcus, at 32. Meanwhile, you're still supervising dock workers. Something cold settled in my chest. Not anger. I'd burned through anger years ago. This was something clearer, harder. Resolve. "I run operations for the 3rd largest shipping facility in the region," I said quietly. We process $60 million in cargo monthly. My team has a 99.7% accuracy rate. But you're right, Dad. I'm just supervising dock workers. Jonathan smirked into his wine glass. Mom looked down at her plate, and Dad leaned forward with that expression he used when he was about to deliver what he thought was wisdom. You know what your problem is, Marcus? You're comfortable. You found a ceiling you could reach, and you stopped climbing. You lack ambition. You lack hunger. He paused for effect. You lack what makes men like Jonathan and me successful. You're competent at a job that doesn't matter. The table went silent. Even Jonathan looked uncomfortable for a moment, like Dad had maybe gone too far. But Dad never thought he went too far. He thought he was being honest, helping me see reality. A job that doesn't matter, I repeated slowly. In the grand scheme, no, it doesn't. You're a cog, Marcus. Replaceable. Jonathan is building something, creating value, making decisions that affect hundreds of lives. You're managing schedules. I placed my fork down carefully. My hands were steady. You're right about one thing, I said. I am managing schedules. Schedules that keep food on grocery store shelves, medicine in hospitals, parts in factories. But you're correct. It doesn't matter compared to whatever Jonathan's doing in his corner office. I stood up. Mom's hand moved like she might reach for me, then stopped. Where are you going? Dad asked, and I heard the irritation in his voice, like I was disrupting his script. Home, I said simply. I've got an early shift tomorrow managing things that don't matter. Marcus, don't be dramatic, Dad said, but I was already walking toward the door. Sit down, he called after me louder now. We're not finished. I stopped at the entrance to the private room and turned back. They were all watching me. Dad with frustration, Mom with concern, Jonathan with something I couldn't quite read. Yeah, I said. We are. I left the Hamilton Hotel that night feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not hurt, liberation. For 15 years I've been measuring myself against their metrics, trying to prove worth in a system designed to rank me last. Walking to my truck in the parking garage, past Jonathan's Mercedes and Dad's Lexus, climbing into my beat-up F-150 with 190,000 miles on it. I felt lighter than I had in years. I didn't know it then, but I was about to feel a lot heavier. 72 hours later, my phone started ringing at 6:47 a.m. I was already up, coffee made, reviewing the day's shipping manifests at my kitchen table. The apartment was small, 800 square feet, nothing like the house I grew up in, but it was mine, paid for with my own money. No one's name on the lease, but mine. The first call was from Mom. I let it go to voicemail. The second call was from Jonathan. Then Mom again. Then a number I didn't recognize. Then Dad. By 7:15 a.m., I had 23 missed calls. Something was wrong. Not regular family drama wrong, catastrophically wrong. I called Mom back. She answered on the first ring. Marcus. Her voice was shattered, barely holding together. Oh God, Marcus, please come. Please. Mom, what happened? Jonathan. The company. Marcus. Everything. She was crying too hard to form sentences. I heard Dad's voice in the background, sharp and commanding even in crisis. Give me the phone, Patricia. Then Dad's voice, and it stopped me cold because I'd never heard him sound like this. Desperate. Marcus, you need to come to the house right now. What happened? Jonathan's company is under federal investigation. SEC FBI. They raided the offices this morning. He's been suspended pending the investigation. Charges might be coming. The words didn't process at first. They were too big, too sudden. Jonathan, with his corner office and his COO title and his perfect trajectory, was under federal investigation. For what? I asked. Securities fraud, insider trading. Marcus, I don't have time to explain everything. We need you here. Now. The drive to my parents' estate took 25 minutes. I'd grown up in that house. The sprawling colonial on 4 acres with the circular driveway, and the gardens Mom paid someone else to maintain. I'd left at 18 for college and barely looked back. Now I was returning to what felt like a crime scene. Jonathan's Mercedes was parked at an angle across the driveway like he'd arrived in a panic. Dad's Lexus was there. So it was a car I didn't recognize, sleek, black, probably a lawyer. I knocked once, and Mom opened the door. Her eyes were red, makeup ruined. She grabbed me like I was a life raft. Thank God you're here. The house felt different. All the careful staging, the curated success, seemed like set dressing now. In the living room, Jonathan sat on the leather couch, head in his hands. Dad paced like a caged animal. A man in a suit I didn't recognize sat in the armchair, a leather briefcase beside him. Marcus, Dad said, stopping mid-pace. This is Richard Hendricks, our attorney. Hendricks nodded at me. His expression was grave. Mr. Smith, someone want to tell me what's happening? I asked. Jonathan looked up. His face was pale, eyes hollow. The confident, smirking man from 3 days ago was gone. They think I knew, he said hoarsely. About the accounting irregularities. The offshore accounts. They think I helped structure the fraud. Did you? I asked. Marcus, Mom gasped. But Jonathan just shook his head. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. I was doing my job, following directives from the CEO. I trusted the numbers they gave me. Hendricks cleared his throat. The investigation is in early stages, but it's serious. The company's stock has been halted. Several executives have been arrested. Jonathan hasn't been charged yet, but he's considered a person of interest. How bad? I asked. Bad, Hendricks said simply. If charges are filed, we're looking at potential prison time. Even if he's cleared, his reputation in the industry is destroyed. No one will touch him. The room absorbed that information like a physical weight. Jonathan dropped his head back into his hands. Mom sat down heavily. Dad kept pacing. There's more, Dad said, and his voice had an edge I'd never heard before. Fear. The company froze all executive accounts pending the investigation. Jonathan's salary, his bonuses, everything, it's all locked. The mortgage on his condo, his car payments, they're all tied to income that just stopped. How much does he owe? I asked. Jonathan's voice was muffled through his hands. $12,000 a month in fixed expenses. Condo, car, the boat. You have a boat. Not anymore, he said bitterly. Dad stopped pacing and looked at me directly. Jonathan needs $25,000 immediately to cover his obligations while this sorts out. Legal fees alone are going to run 6 figures. The number hung in the air. $25,000. More money than most people had in savings. I made decent money at the shipping yard, but I wasn't making COO money. Still, I'd been careful. Lived below my means. Saved aggressively. I had it. They somehow knew I had it. You have savings, Dad said, reading my expression. You've always been careful with money. Frugal, Jonathan muttered. That's the word you usually use. Jonathan, Mom said sharply. I looked at my brother. 3 days ago he'd smirked about me moving boxes. Now he was drowning and looking at me like I was the only shore in sight. Why should I? I asked quietly. The room went still. Even Hendricks looked uncomfortable. Because he's your brother, Mom said immediately. The brother who spent the last 15 years treating me like I'm beneath him? Marcus, this isn't the time, Dad said, but there was no force in it. He knew. They all knew. I turned to Jonathan directly. You remember what you said to me? 3 days ago at dinner. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Marcus, you remember what Dad said? That I'm a cog. That my job doesn't matter. That I lack ambition. I kept my voice level. You sat there and watched him say it. You smiled. I'm sorry, Jonathan said, and his voice cracked. I'm sorry, okay? I was an arrogant asshole. I believed my own press. I thought. He looked up at me finally. I thought I was better than you. I was wrong. The apology landed strangely. I'd imagined this moment in different forms over the years. Imagined Jonathan or Dad finally acknowledging how they'd treated me. I'd always thought it would feel like victory. It didn't. It felt hollow. Marcus, Dad said, and his tone had changed. Not commanding now. Pleading. I know I've been hard on you. I know I've said things, done things that hurt you. But this family needs you right now. Jonathan needs you. $25,000, I said. Just to start, Hendricks interjected. To stabilize the immediate situation while we build his defense. I looked around the room. At Mom, desperate and crying. At Dad, stripped of his usual authority. At Jonathan, completely broken. At the lawyer who was calculating billable hours in his head. I need to think about it, I said. Think about it. Dad's voice rose. Marcus, they're going to take his condo. They're going to. I said I need to think about it. I walked toward the door. Mom called after me. Marcus, please. He's your brother. Family is everything. I stopped, hand on the doorknob. Funny, I said without turning around. That's not what it felt like 3 days ago. I left them there, drove back to my apartment, and sat in my truck in the parking lot for an hour. My phone rang constantly. I didn't answer. I just stared at the steering wheel, thinking about that word Dad used at dinner. Leverage. He'd taught me something, even if he didn't mean to. Leverage wasn't just about money or position. It was about necessity, about being the person someone else needed more than you needed them. For 15 years, I'd needed their approval, their validation, their recognition that I mattered. Now they needed something from me. Money, yes. But more than that, they needed me to be the person they'd insisted I wasn't. Successful, reliable, capable of solving problems that their golden child couldn't. The irony was sharp enough to cut. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and my bank statements. I had $38,000 in savings. Years of living in a small apartment, driving an old truck, skipping vacations, saying no to things I wanted because I was building something. Security, independence, proof that I could make it without them. $25,000 would gut that. It would take years to rebuild, and there was no guarantee I'd ever see it again. Jonathan was facing potential prison time. Even if he was cleared, his career was destroyed. He had no income, no prospects, and apparently no savings despite making triple my salary. But here's what kept circling in my head. This wasn't really about the money. This was about something much bigger. This was about rewriting the story they'd been telling about me my entire life. At 11 p.m., I called Dad back. "Marcus," he answered immediately. "Listen, I'll do it," I said. "But not the way you think." Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, "What do you mean?" "I'll pay Jonathan's immediate expenses. $25,000 to cover him for the next few months. But there are conditions." "Conditions," Dad repeated. "I want a written agreement. Notarized. Jonathan agrees to monthly payments once he's employed again, with interest. 5%, same as a personal loan. You want to charge your brother interest? I want to treat this like the business transaction it is. Because that's what you taught me, Dad. Everything is a transaction. Everything has terms." Another pause. "What else?" "Jonathan comes to work with me. At the shipping yard." "What?" "You heard me. While he's waiting for this investigation to resolve, while he's looking for whatever comes next, he works at the yard. Entry level. Learning what real work looks like. Learning what I actually do." "Marcus, he's not going to." "Then I don't write the check. Those are the terms. Take them or leave them." I heard muffled conversation in the background, probably Dad covering the phone to talk to Mom or Jonathan. Then Dad came back on. "He'll do it." "One more thing," I said. "You apologize. Publicly, in front of the whole family. For every dismissive thing you've said about my work, my choices, my life. You acknowledge that you were wrong." The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. Then, quietly, "Okay. Tomorrow," I said. "All of you come to the yard at 7 a.m. We'll sign the paperwork, and Jonathan starts immediately." I hung up before he could respond. The next morning I arrived at the shipping yard at 5:30 a.m. The sun was just starting to break over the container stacks, painting the steel in orange and gold. My crew started arriving at 6:15. Tommy, Rodriguez, Chun, Marcus Jr., no relation, we just had the same first name. Davis, all of them good men who showed up every day and did hard work without expecting recognition. At 6:55 a.m., Alexis pulled into the visitor parking area. Dad, Mom, and Jonathan got out. Jonathan was wearing khakis and a polo shirt, the closest thing to manual labor clothes he probably owned. He looked like he hadn't slept. None of them had. I met them at the gate. "Morning." "Marcus," Dad said. His voice was tight, controlled. Pride and necessity were still fighting a war in his expression. I handed Jonathan a clipboard with forms. "These are the employment papers. Standard new hire packet. Fill them out. You start at $17 an hour." Jonathan's head snapped up. 17. That's entry level. Same as everyone else who starts here. He looked at the clipboard like it was a foreign object, then started filling it out. While he worked, I turned to Dad. "The apology," I said simply. Mom touched his arm. Dad's jaw worked like the words were physically difficult to produce. Finally, he spoke. "I was wrong about you, Marcus. About your work, about your choices. I measured success by the wrong metrics. I compared you to Jonathan in ways that were unfair. I made you feel like you weren't enough when the truth is..." He stopped, swallowed. "The truth is you've been enough this entire time. More than enough. I'm sorry. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't eloquent. But it was real, and real was what mattered." "Thank you," I said. Jonathan handed me the completed clipboard. I looked it over, then handed him a hard hat and safety vest. "Rodriguez will be your supervisor. You do exactly what he says, when he says it. You show up on time, Work hard, and don't expect special treatment because of your last name. Understood. Understood, Jonathan said quietly. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, then transferred $25,000 to Jonathan's account. Mom gasped when she saw the amount go through. Dad's eyes closed briefly like he was praying or preparing himself for something. This is a loan, I reminded them. With terms. When you're back on your feet, we have a payment plan. Jonathan nodded. I'll pay you back. Every penny. I know you will, I said. Because I'm going to make sure you understand what $25,000 means to someone who actually earns it. Rodriguez walked up then, a stocky man in his 50s who'd been working the docks for 23 years. This the new guy? He asked, looking Jonathan up and down. This is Jonathan, I said. He's learning the business from the ground up. Show him everything. Rodriguez nodded. Come on, kid. We've got 3 container ships unloading this morning. You're going to learn real quick. He started walking and Jonathan followed, glancing back once at our parents before disappearing into the maze of shipping containers. Mom was crying silently. Dad looked 10 years older than he had a week ago. He'll be okay, I said to them. But he needs to learn what the real world looks like. Thank you, Marcus, Mom whispered. I nodded. Go home. Get some rest. This is going to be a long process. They left, and I went back to my office, a small room with a desk, a computer, and windows that overlooked the entire yard. From here I could see Jonathan following Rodriguez, struggling to keep up, clearly overwhelmed. Good. Overwhelmed meant learning. The first week was brutal for him. Jonathan showed up every morning exhausted, hands blistered, muscles sore from work his gym routine had never prepared him for. He operated forklifts, loaded pallets, learned shipping codes, dealt with difficult customers, worked in the rain and the heat. Rodriguez didn't cut him any slack, and I'd specifically instructed him not to. But something started to happen around day 8. Jonathan stopped complaining. His posture changed. He started asking questions about the actual logistics, the planning, how we coordinated everything. He started seeing the complexity I'd been managing for years. One evening after the shift ended, he knocked on my office door. His face was dirty, shirt soaked with sweat. Can I ask you something? He said. Sure. How do you do this? Not just the physical work, but the coordination. Keeping track of 47 people, hundreds of shipments, all the regulations, the customers, the problems. How do you hold it all in your head? I leaned back in my chair. Practice. Experience. Giving a damn. He nodded slowly. I used to think my job was hard. Meetings, presentations, strategy sessions. But this, he gestured vaguely at the yard outside. This is different. If I mess up a spreadsheet, someone checks it. If you mess up here, people don't eat. Hospitals don't get medicine. Factories shut down. Yeah, I said simply. I'm sorry, he said, and this time it landed differently than it had in my parents' living room. This time it came from understanding. I'm sorry for every shitty thing I said. Every look, every comment. I thought I was above this. I thought you were wasting your potential. I was wrong. I know, I said. He studied me for a moment. You're not what I thought you were. No, I agreed. I'm not what Dad thought I was either. But I'm exactly who I need to be. Jonathan nodded and left. I watched him walk to his car, not the Mercedes anymore, that had been repossessed. Now he drove a 10-year-old Honda he'd bought with part of the money I'd loaned him. He looked tired but different. More solid somehow. More real. 3 weeks in, the family dynamic had completely shifted. Dad started showing up at the yard once a week, watching from a distance, never interfering but clearly processing what he was seeing. Mom brought lunch sometimes, sitting in my office while I worked, telling me things she'd never said before about how proud she was, how she'd always known I was capable but hadn't defended me the way she should have. The investigation into Jonathan's company dragged on. Hendricks kept us updated. Charges were filed against the CEO and CFO, but Jonathan remained a witness, not a suspect. The prosecutors believed his story that he'd been following orders, trusting the numbers he was given. It would take months to fully clear his name, but the trajectory was positive. During this time, something unexpected happened at the shipping yard. A position opened up, logistics coordinator, a mid-level management role that required someone who understood both the physical operations and the administrative side. I offered it to Jonathan. Why? He asked when I told him. Because you've learned the work. You understand what we do now. And you're good at the planning side, the coordination. This place needs someone who can bridge both worlds. After everything I did to you, you're promoting me? I'm not promoting you because of our history, I said. I'm promoting you because you earned it. There's a difference. He took the job, and he was good at it. Really good. The arrogance was gone, replaced by genuine competence and humility. The crew respected him because he'd worked beside them, bled beside them, understood what they did every day. For months after the federal raid, Hendricks called with news. All charges against Jonathan were dropped. He was cleared completely, named as a cooperating witness. His name might be damaged in corporate circles, but legally, he was clean. That night, I invited everyone to my apartment for dinner. Mom, Dad, Jonathan. It was cramped with all of us there, my small dining table barely big enough, but it felt right. To Marcus, Dad said, raising his glass of wine. For saving this family when we didn't deserve it. I didn't save you, I said. You saved yourselves. I just gave you the space to do it. Jonathan spoke up. I've been thinking about something. The loan. The $25,000. I want to start paying it back, but I also want to propose something else. What? I asked. Partner with me. Really partner. I've been working with Rodriguez on a new logistics software concept, something that could streamline container coordination across multiple facilities. We'd need startup capital, business planning, operational expertise. He looked at me directly. I can't do it without you. Not just your money, your knowledge, your leadership. I studied him. This wasn't the desperate man from 4 months ago. This was someone who'd been broken down and built back different. Better. I'll think about it, I said. Dad cleared his throat. Before we go further, I need to say something. Marcus, I spent 30 years building a commercial real estate empire based on what I thought success looked like. Big deals, big names, big titles. I raised both my sons to value the same things. I was wrong. Success isn't the size of your office or your salary. It's the impact you make, the people you help, the work you do that matters to someone other than yourself. He paused, and I saw his eyes were wet. You've been successful your entire adult life, and I was too blind and too arrogant to see it. You're a better man than I ever was. A better man than I taught you to be. And I'm proud of you. Not proud like I'm taking credit. Proud like I'm witnessing something I had nothing to do with creating. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Mom was crying. Jonathan stared at his plate. Thank you, I managed to say. The conversation moved to lighter topics after that. Mom's garden, Dad's consulting work, Jonathan's software concept. But something fundamental had shifted. The power dynamic, the hierarchy, the unspoken rules about who mattered and who didn't. All of it had been dismantled and rebuilt into something healthier. 6 months after that dinner, Jonathan and I did partner on the logistics software. We called it Chainlink, and we built it from the ground up using my operational experience and his business acumen. It took 2 years of 18-hour days, failures, pivots, and breakthroughs. We bootstrapped it with our savings, my remaining $13,000 and money Jonathan saved from his coordinator salary. The software launched in 12 regional shipping facilities, then 25, then 60. 3 years after we started, we had contracts with logistics companies across the country. The business was valued at $8 million. But here's what mattered more than the money. Jonathan and I built it as equals. True partners. No hierarchy, no golden child, no comparison. Just 2 men who'd learned to see each other clearly. Dad watched from the sidelines with something like wonder. He'd spent his life building an empire that would eventually be sold to strangers. We were building something together, something that meant more because of where we'd started. One afternoon, I was in the shipping yard. We'd expanded, now managing operations for the software company while still running the original facility, when I saw a young guy, maybe 23, struggling with a pallet. His supervisor was barking orders, clearly frustrated. I walked over. You okay? The kid looked up, embarrassed. Sorry, sir. I'm new. I'm trying to figure out the load distribution. I showed him the technique, explaining the physics of weight distribution, why it mattered. His supervisor started to walk away, but I stopped him. Give him time, I said. Everyone's new once. Everyone struggles. Doesn't mean they won't be great at this eventually. The supervisor nodded and backed off. The kid looked at me with something like relief. Thank you, Mr. Smith. As I walked back to the office, I thought about that moment at the Hamilton Hotel, about Dad's words. You're a cog, Marcus, replaceable. And I realized something profound. He'd been wrong about the job, but he'd also been wrong about the whole premise. Being a cog isn't the insult. Being the person who keeps the machine running, who teaches the next generation, who shows up when things are hard. That's not small. That's everything. 7 years after that initial dinner, after the federal raid, after Jonathan's transformation, after building Chainlink into something real, we sold the company. Not to strangers, but to a cooperative of logistics workers who'd helped us build it. We structured it so every employee got equity. Every person who'd loaded pallets, coordinated shipments, worked the overnight shifts, they all got a piece. The payout was substantial. Jonathan became independently wealthy. So did I. But the money felt secondary to what we'd actually built. Proof that you could measure success differently, that you could value people differently, that you could break the cycle of comparison and judgment and build something based on mutual respect instead. On the day we signed the papers, Jonathan and I stood in the parking lot of the shipping yard where he'd started at $17 an hour, where he'd learned what real work meant. You ever regret it? He asked. That dinner. Walking out. The way it all played out. I thought about it honestly. About the pain, the humiliation, the years of feeling like I didn't measure up. About the crisis that forced everyone to see differently. About the work we'd built together. No, I said finally. I don't. Because if that dinner doesn't happen, none of this happens. We don't become partners. We don't build Chainlink. You don't learn. Dad doesn't change. Mom doesn't find her voice. We just keep performing the same broken dynamic forever. Jonathan nodded. I was thinking the same thing. My whole life I thought I was winning. That corner office, that title, Dad's approval. I thought that was success. Then it all collapsed and I learned what actual success looks like. It looks like showing up when things are hard. It looks like being the person people can rely on. It looks like, he stopped, smiled. It looks like you. We stood there watching the container ships being unloaded, the forklifts moving in coordinated precision, the whole complex operation that most people never see, but depends on people like us showing up every day. You know what the real lesson is? I said, it's not that I was right and Dad was wrong. It's not that your old life was fake and this one is real. It's that success isn't a single path. It's not corner offices or shipping yards. It's not titles or salary. It's figuring out what matters to you and building a life around that, regardless of what anyone else thinks. Even family, Jonathan said. Especially family, I agreed. Because family should be the people who see you clearly and love you anyway, not the people who force you into a mold and reject you when you don't fit. He extended his hand. I shook it. Then we walked to our cars. I still drove a truck, though a newer one now. And Jonathan had finally bought another nice car, but with cash this time, no debt, and we drove home to lives we'd built on our own terms. The story could end there, with reconciliation and business success and lessons learned. But life isn't that neat. There's one more piece, and it matters. 2 years after selling Chainlink, Dad got sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, diagnosed too late. He had maybe 6 months. The doctors were clear. This was about making him comfortable, not about curing him. I took a leave from my consulting work to help Mom take care of him. Jonathan did the same. We converted the downstairs study into a bedroom so Dad wouldn't have to manage stairs. We hired nurses. We coordinated medication schedules. We sat with him during the bad days, and there were a lot of bad days. One afternoon, maybe 3 months before the end, I was sitting with him while Mom rested and Jonathan handled some paperwork. Dad was lucid but weak, his body betraying him in ways that would have humiliated him in his healthier days. Marcus, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. Save your strength, I said. No. Listen. He struggled to sit up slightly. When you walked out of that dinner, I thought you were weak. I thought you were being emotional, unable to handle criticism. I thought it proved everything I'd always said about you. I didn't respond. Just let him talk. When Jonathan's life fell apart and you made those demands, those conditions, I thought you were being vindictive, getting revenge. I almost convinced Jonathan not to agree. Why didn't you? Because your mother stopped me. She said you were the only one thinking clearly, that you saw what Jonathan needed, what we all needed, even if we couldn't see it ourselves. She was right. He paused, breathing carefully. You saved him, Marcus. Not with the money, with the work. By making him learn. By not letting him hide in shame or desperation. You gave him a path forward that I never could have. You would have figured it out, I said. No, Dad said firmly. I wouldn't have. I would have just given him money and let him drift, let him collapse under the weight of his failure. You made him stand up. You rebuilt him. He coughed, and I helped him with water. When he settled, he continued, "You want to know the hardest thing about dying? What? Realizing all the time you wasted being wrong. All the years I spent measuring you by metrics that didn't matter, dismissing work that did matter. I can't get those years back. I can't undo the damage. All I can do is tell you, before I go, that you were right. About everything. About work, about success, about what matters. And I'm sorry I made you spend so much of your life proving it." I felt my throat tighten. This wasn't the formal apology from the shipping yard, the one given under duress. This was deathbed honesty, the kind that comes when pretense no longer serves any purpose. "I forgave you a long time ago, Dad," I said. "I know. That's what makes it worse." He smiled weakly. "You forgave me before I deserved it. Before I even asked. That's who you are. That's who you've always been." He died 6 weeks later, surrounded by family. The funeral was large: business associates, old friends, community members. People talked about his commercial real estate legacy, his business acumen, his success. Jonathan gave a eulogy about lessons learned and time valued. Mom talked about their 53 years together. When it was my turn, I stood at the podium and looked out at the gathered faces. "My father spent most of his life believing success was measurable," I said. "Revenue, titles, square footage, deals closed. He built an empire based on those metrics. And he tried to teach his sons to measure themselves the same way." I paused, finding the right words. But in his last years, he learned something different. He learned that success isn't what you build, it's who you become while building it. It's not the empire, it's the person who decides what the empire is for. It's not the title, it's how you treat the people who don't have titles. And it's definitely not about being better than someone else. It's about being better than you were yesterday. I looked at Jonathan, sitting in the front row. My father taught me that lesson late, but he did teach it. And in doing so, he gave me the greatest gift any parent can give: permission to be exactly who I am, without apology or comparison. After the service, Jonathan and I stood in the cemetery as the crowd dispersed. Mom had gone to the car, exhausted. It was just us and the groundskeepers. "Do you think he was happy?" Jonathan asked. At the end, I thought about Dad's last weeks, about the conversations we'd had, the peace that seemed to settle over him once he'd said what he needed to say. "Yeah," I said. "I think once he stopped fighting who we actually were, he found something like peace. He got to see both his sons succeed on their own terms. He got to understand that different doesn't mean less. That's more than a lot of parents get. More than he deserved, probably," Jonathan said. "Maybe. But that's the thing about grace. It's not about deserving. It's about giving people room to grow, even when they've spent years not giving you that room." We walked to our cars through rows of headstones, each one marking a life lived, a story completed. Dad's stone would join them soon, with his name and dates, and probably something about business success. But what would really remain would be the lesson he finally learned, the one he passed on before the end. That success without meaning is just motion. That love without understanding is just performance. And that family isn't about who's winning or losing. It's about who shows up when everything falls apart and helps everyone find their way forward. I'm Marcus Smith. I'm 45 now. I run a consulting firm that helps logistics companies optimize their operations. Jonathan runs the nonprofit arm of what Chainlink became, providing job training and placement for people trying to restart their careers. We work together still, but separately enough to be our own men. Mom lives in a smaller house now. The estate sold after Dad died. She volunteers at the community center, teaches gardening classes, seems lighter somehow, without the weight of maintaining appearances. I still drive a truck, still live in an apartment, though a nicer one now. Still show up at shipping yards and talk to workers about load distribution and coordination problems. Still find meaning in work that most people never think about, but depends on people caring enough to get it right. And here's what I learned from all of it: the whole messy, painful, beautiful journey. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's metrics. Not your father's, not your family's, not society's. You get to decide what success means. You get to define what matters. You get to build a life that makes sense to you, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone else. The people who love you will eventually see it. The people who don't will reveal themselves. And the greatest gift you can give yourself is permission to be exactly who you are, doing exactly what you're meant to do, without apology. Because at the end, when someone's writing your eulogy, They won't talk about your title or your salary or your office. They'll talk about how you made people feel, whether you showed up when things were hard, whether you helped people find their way when they were lost. That's the measure that matters. That's the success that lasts. Everything else is just noise.